Case number 2. One day I arrived at Baker Street to find my friend in a deep conversation with a stout, red-faced, elderly gentleman with fiery red hair. "You couldn't have come at a better time, Watson," said Holmes. He turned to his visitor. Mr. Wilson, this gentleman has helped me in many of my most successful cases. I'm sure he'll be useful in your case, too." Holmes waved me to a seat and took his own, putting his fingertips together to get ready for thinking. "You may remember me from saying, Watson, that real life offers far more strange and interesting combinations than anything born of the imagination." "An idea that I told you I find hard to believe," I said. "You did, but you'll soon come around to my point of view. Mr. Jabez Wilson here has a story that may be the oddest I've heard in some time. Will you be so kind, Mr. Wilson, as to begin your story again for Dr. Watson's benefit?" Holmes Klein puffed his chest with pride and pulled a dirty, wrinkled newspaper from his coat pocket. I tried to study him the way Holmes would, but I didn't discover much. Wilson looked an everyday sort of working man. Pudgy, stuffy, and slow. He wore baggy trousers, a dull vest with a gold watch chain, and a squared coin dangling from it, and a not very clean jacket. The only remarkable thing about him was his blazing red hair and the unhappy look on his face. Holmes noticed what I was doing and smiled. Beyond the obvious fact that Mr. Wilson has at some time done manual labor, has been in China, and has done a lot of writing lately, I can deduce nothing else. Wilson jolted upright and stared at my friend at astonishment. "How did you know that?" he asked. "It's true that I once did manual labor. I started as a ship's carpenter." "Your right hand is a whole glove size larger than your left," said Holmes. "You have worked with it, so its muscles are more developed." "And the writing?" "Your right cuff is shiny for 5 inches. It's been rubbing on the desk as you write. Your left elbow is shiny too, where you rest it on the desk." "That's true too. But China?" "The fish tattooed on your right wrist could only have been done there. I have made a study of tattoo marks. Staining the fish's scales that shade of pink is quite particular to China. I also see a Chinese coin hanging from your watch chain. Nothing could be more simple." Wilson laughed heartily. "Oh ho," he said. "At first I thought that you'd done something clever, but now I see that there was nothing to it at all. After all, I'm beginning to think, Watson," said Holmes, "that it's a mistake to explain Mr. Wilson. Have you found that ad?" "Yes," he said, handing it to me. I read, "To the Red-Headed League. There's a job now open that entitles a member of the League to a salary of $4 a week for minor tasks. All red-headed men of sound body and mind and above the age of 21 are eligible. Apply in person to Duncan Ross at the League offices at 7 Pope's Court, Fleet Street." "This is extraordinary," I exclaimed after reading it twice. Holmes chuckled in delight. "It is, isn't it?" said he. "Now let's listen to Mr. Wilson's story. First, Watson, note the paper's date. April 27th, 1890. That was just 2 months ago. I have a small pawnbroker's business in Coburg Square," said Wilson. "I do all the writing, but just barely. I can afford only one assistant, and I couldn't afford even him if he hadn't agreed to work for half wages to learn the business." "What is the name of this obliged youth?" asked Holmes. "Vincent Spaulding," replied Wilson, "and he's not all that young. I couldn't ask for a smarter assistant. He could make lots more money elsewhere, but why should I put ideas in his head?" "Indeed," said Holmes, Your good fortune in such an assistant may be as remarkable as your advertisement." "Oh, he's not perfect," said Wilson. "He's forever snapping away from his camera and diving into the basement to develop his pictures. But he's a good worker. I was content with my life, till Spaulding showed me the ad. I'm sure wish," he said, "that I was a red-headed man. There's a vacancy on the League of Red-Headed Men. It's worth quite a little fortune to the man who gets it." I never heard of the League, which amazed Spaulding. He said that I was perfect for it, and could easily earn a couple hundred a year for almost no work. The League, he told me, was founded by an eccentric American millionaire who wanted to help his fellow redheads succeed in life. He left his enormous fortune to just that purpose. I was tempted, but remarked that millions of men would surely show up. "Not as many as you'd think," said Spaulding. "I hear that the hair must be a particular shade of red. Like yours, I think. Why not at least give it a try and see what happens?" So I did, and Spaulding went with me. Fleet Street was mobbed with men with every shade of red hair imaginable. I was about to give up in despair, but Spaulding wouldn't let me. He pushed and shoved us toward the front of the line where a man with bright red hair was seated at a table. "This is Mr. Jabez Wilson," said Spaulding, "and he's interested in your vacancy." "He's perfect for it," said the man, hopping from his chair to examine me more closely, almost rudely. Then he grabbed my hair and tugged it till I cried out in pain. "Sorry," he said, "but I had to be sure it wasn't a wig or dyed. You wouldn't believe what some people will try. That man, Duncan Ross, sent everyone else away and gave me the job. I was very pleased, I can tell you. He laid down the rules. The hours were 10 to 2, which was fine. Most of a pawnbroker's work is done in the evenings. And Spaulding said he'd watch the shop for me. The pay was $4 a week, also fine. All I had to do was stay in the office for those hours. If I left for any reason, I'd be fired immediately. My job was to copy out the Encyclopedia Britannica, starting with Volume 1. I started the very next day. I have been working away at it all these 8 weeks. I almost finished the A's and was looking forward to starting the B's. Then suddenly the whole business came to an end this morning. I arrived at work to find this note pinned to the door. He held up a piece of white cardboard on which the following message had been written: "The Red-Headed League is dissolved, October 9th, 1890. I went to the landlord, Wilson continued, and asked where I might find my employer, Mr. Duncan Ross. But he'd never heard of Ross, or the League. When I described Ross, he said, "Oh, that's William Morris, a lawyer. He was only using the space temporarily, while his office was being redecorated. Here's his address." I hurried over there, but it was a factory, not legal offices, and no one there has ever heard of Ross, Morris, or anyone fitting his description. I hate to lose that extra cash, Mr. Holmes. Can you help me?" "I wouldn't miss this case for anything in the world," said Holmes. "Please answer a few questions for me. How long had Spaulding worked for you when he showed you the ad?" "About a month." "How did he find you?" "He answered an ad I'd put out." "Was he the only applicant?" "No, there were dozens." Why did you pick him?" "Because he would work cheap." "What does he look like?" "Small, stout, and no hair on his face, though he's at least 30. He has a splash of white acid on his forehead." Holmes sat up in excitement. "I thought so. Is he still working for you?" "Certainly," said Wilson. "Thank you," said Holmes. That will do. Today is Saturday. We should have this settled before Monday." Wilson shook our hands and left.